Hi everybody, this is Ron MacCloskey. I'm normally here talking about classic movies, but today I want to talk about a classic monster, Frankenstein. I just fell in love with the movie, fell in love with the whole concept, fell in love with the actor. These were great movies that were made in the 1930s. In the 1960s, they had like a resurgence. They were put on television, and it was just great. I grew up in the New York area. There's a guy named John Zackerly who hosted all these monster movies, and he was great. He was funny. He told stuff about the background of the movies and whatever, and I just fell in love with them. Across the country, they had different hosts that did their own things, but for me, Zackerly was my tour guide for all these Universal monster movies. And shortly after that, they then had toys in the stores. They had monster models, of course, which I got, and I collected the whole series, never threw them away. And then they had toys and games and figures and dolls, and it's just amazing. Every year, because Frankenstein is public domain, any company can put out a Frankenstein, and it's amazing what you'll see. Every year there's something different, and I'm so surprised when I go in the store and find something I'd never seen before. And it's wonderful for me as a collector. And then I've gone to some of these conventions. In this area, there's a place called Chiller Theater Expo. It's usually every October. It's held in North Jersey, and you get to meet some of these stars. Believe it or not, some of these stars from old-time movies, old-time TV series, and I've met a lot of people. I've been very fortunate. I became friends with Sarah Karloff. Now, Sarah is the daughter of Boris Karloff, and Boris Karloff was the actor that played the monster in that classic 1931 Universal movie. For fans out there, the trivia question is, when was the first film Frankenstein? And that was 1910. And it was made by Thomas Edison. Now, back by then, Edison had his own studio, but it was in Long Island. But they actually developed the film at his laboratories in West Orange, New Jersey. And along the side of the film, you can actually see Orange, New Jersey. So there's a great trivia question for you, that Thomas Edison and New Jersey has a connection with Frankenstein. Well, the 31 film was probably the best amongst people that really love this stuff. It was followed by The Bride of Frankenstein, then The Son of Frankenstein. They each had great things too. Bride of Frankenstein had a marvelous musical score, great music. Son of Frankenstein was good. It had Basil Rathbone in it. And then they went on and they did their own kind of series. It wasn't as good, but it was entertaining. And when you're a kid and you're watching this stuff, you just fall in love with it. The difference between me and other people, they kind of grew up and moved on and collected other things. I didn't. I still collect Frankenstein stuff to this day. And like I said, it's fascinating when you walk into a store and you see different things. Let me show you one thing. I picked this up, believe it or not, just about 10 years ago. It's a Frankenstein lunchbox, and it's wonderful. It's just like the old style. It's got the handle to it. It's got the little clasp up here, and you open it up, and you have a Frankenstein thermos. You can put in a cold drink, and it's just fantastic. You know, these companies make these things, sometimes just a limited quantity because they're not going to know how well they're going to sell. And you can buy something like this. Believe it or not, I think I paid only $5 for it. You go on eBay today, it's worth $100. So that's what's so great about this stuff. And, you know, a lot of people have asked me over the years, they said, Ron, you were so smart to focus on Frankenstein and only that, and I'm sure it's worth a lot of money. I don't do it for the money. I never have. I just love this stuff, and I love to share with people different collectibles that I have. I'm also very fortunate. When I was 13 years old, I had read in the newspaper that Boris Karloff was sick and in the hospital. So as a fan, I wrote him a note, said, I hope you're getting better, and he wrote me back. And I kept the envelope, and I kept the card, and it's dated October 1968, and it was wonderful. And in his handwriting, he wrote his signature, and the card said, I'm fully recovered and back to work. Unfortunately, 4 months later, February 1969, Boris Karloff passed away. Now, some collectors have told me that that signature, that card, and that envelope is worth $5,000. But for me, it's priceless. I mean, it's just something that I really cherish. And it's something that I also shared with Sarah Karloff, his daughter, many years later. Frankenstein, again, for those fans out there who may know or may not know, was written by an 18-year-old girl, Mary Shelley. As a matter of fact, this year is the 200th anniversary of the original story. The first line was this: it was a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. And that was it. That's the first line she wrote. It was based on a ghostwriting story that She was with friends and family. They were vacationing in Switzerland in 1860. That summer was very cold and chilly. They were forced to stay inside. They were getting bored, and someone said, "Hey, why don't we have a ghost writing contest?" Most of the party right away come up with stories, except for Mary. She couldn't think of any. And finally, on the last day, the night before, she said she had a nightmare. And she imagined this young medical student standing over this body, a body that he had created and brought to life. And that was the original story of Frankenstein. Her husband, Percy Shelley, the famous poet, said, "You should, make this into a real novel, a whole full-blown story." So she did. She expanded it. And it was published in March of 1818, and it's never been out of print. And I think it's great. I think there's a great lesson there, a great moral lesson about prejudice and judging someone or a creature that's not allowed to be with society because of the way they looked. And that's exactly what that story was. That story was about a creature that looked different, acted different, and wasn't allowed to be with the rest of the population. So if you haven't had a chance to read the story, the original one, you really should. Here's what I did a couple years ago. I had so many things in my collection. I noticed I had a lot of artwork. And I said, well, why don't I, make this a subcategory and do something different? So I did. So several years ago, I started with a concept called Frankenstein Artwork. I looked at my collection, found I had hundreds of cartoons, and then I said, well, why don't I contact cartoonists and artists from around the country and see if they'd like to submit things, and they did. And again, it's just great on how this image has been used. You have to realize, so the story was written 200 years ago. The movie was 85 years ago this year, so that's also an anniversary. But before that movie, there was no image. The image that we all know today, which is the flat head and the scars on the face and the bolts on the neck, there was no image until then. Well, once that happened, like I said, artists all over the country, in fact, all over the world, have taken that image and used it over and over and over again. This year, I have some of that collection at the North Edison Library. I have 52 pieces. I've been doing this for 4 years now, so now I have over 200 pieces. And some of these artists, they're fabulous. I mean, they really are. Let me show you one example of a piece of artwork that a friend of mine did called John Deering. What's so great about this piece of art is it talks about the name of Frankenstein, which so many people confuse and so many people argue about. But let me just read the caption. So there's a man at the door, and the monster answers, and you hear the monster say, "Frankenstein, he lives next door. Dr. Victor Frankenstein, I'm Frankenstein's monster. Common mistake." Now here's what's so great about this picture. When I saw the original, it had a different person answering the door, a different drawing completely. And I just wrote to the artist. I said, "Could you please send me, a copy?" He said, "Sure." He actually, this is an original copy. This is not a copy. This is the original drawing that he did just for me, just for that show. So the background is even different from the original. The background looks more like Transylvania or a European country. And the interior even looks different as well, where it looks more like the 17th or 18th century. And his name is John Deering. And he's a great artist. I have some new stuff of his in my collection today as well. I have another artist. His name is Paul Garner. And he did a wonderful drawing of Elvis Presley and Priscilla Presley as the Frankenstein monster and his bride. He's from England, wonderful man. And when I received that, that was in April of 2 years ago. And coincidentally, Priscilla Presley was performing at the Chiller, this Chiller Expo that I told you about. I said, well, I've got to frame it and I've got to give her a copy. So I framed the whole thing, I stood in line. And some of these people, if you've ever been there or not, you have to wait in line because they're so popular. And you have to wait to finally get to the head of the line. And I remember as I'm standing there, one of the people that's with Priscilla says, "So what do you want, a T-shirt or this or that?" I said, "No, I don't want to take anything. I want to give her something." So what do you want to give her? I showed her the picture. She thought it was great. So I finally got to the front of the line. Priscilla just loved it. She just thought it was fabulous. And so she signed it. And then I had the original sent to Paul Garner, who did the work. And then I gave a copy to Priscilla as well. And she joked and said that Priscilla Presley said that Elvis loved Frankenstein. Frankenstein was her favorite monster. This year I have Charlie Rose. as the Frankenstein monster. He dressed up as the Frankenstein monster last year on The Late Show, but unfortunately it was so late in the year, I think it was on Halloween itself, that I had to wait a full year before I put that in the show. One year, I had a picture of Al Gore dressed as the Frankenstein monster. So you'll see there's a lot of people that like Frankenstein. A rock and roll artist, a broadcaster, the vice president, all these different people, they all love Frankenstein just like I do. And the great thing is, it's not over. Every year there's going to be something else. I'm already working on next year to do the artwork. What I'd like to do is probably get it into New York City at a big gallery. Same thing with the collection. Got to keep collecting stuff. So it's been a great ride, and I've had lots of fun meeting people. Met a lot of people that have been in Frankenstein movies, writers, producers, directors, and of course through Sarah Karloff, I've been able to meet people as well. In fact, I met Bela Lugosi Jr. His dad was the original Dracula, and his dad was also the original Igor. I don't think Bela Lugosi gets enough credit as Igor, because he was wonderful in Son of Frankenstein. So that's it, huh? Frankenstein. I love it. And it's interesting to know so many other people do love it too. Because I've been at some of these conventions and I've talked to people and they get up and they talk to me and talk about their stories. So it's great. It's a great hobby. I've loved it since I was a kid. Still love it today. And I hope you enjoy it too. So thank you very much for visiting my stuff. And this is Ron MacCloskey. See you later.